This is the reason that I get up in the morning and that I go around speaking about this event, telling the story of those heroic officers and telling this story to any organization who will listen to me, because this is a culture problem. And in these witness statements, they said that at 9:30 that morning, the shooter actually declared to anyone who would listen, anyone who was in earshot, he said, "If I get called into the office today, I'm going to shoot every MFer in here."
Welcome all, Lieutenant Dan. My real name is actually Dan Skachillis, Hello all. My name is Dan Skachillis, Lieutenant Dan. I am your host, and welcome to this episode of the Workplace Violence Mitigation Podcast. I have a very, very special guest today, someone that I've been wanting to speak to for quite a while, actually, Kristen Ziman. Kristen was the chief of police during an active shooting event in Aurora, Illinois, back in 2019. From a law enforcement perspective, the whole thing was handled very well from a organizational standpoint, but there were a number of injuries. There were lives lost during this event. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation about that event so we can help others learn from the mistakes and the things that weren't known at that time that are now a little more obvious. Kristen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you give us a little bit of information regarding your history, how you came up through the ranks, came to the position of being chief, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lieutenant Dan. It is an honor to be here. Yeah, I started law enforcement at the tender age of 18 years old. I started in my department as a lowly police cadet, and Aurora, Illinois is my hometown. All my friends went away to college, and I said, "Oh no, I want to stay right here and become a police officer in the city of Aurora." And I did. So I spent the first couple years as a police cadet, then became a sworn officer in 1994 at 21 years old. And then I was promoted to sergeant at about 9.5 years in. Spent time, though, in patrol as not only a patrol officer, but community policing officer. And then I spent nearly 5 years as a domestic violence detective, where I learned a whole lot during that tenure. Promoted to sergeant and spent 5.5 years as a street sergeant. And then after that, I was promoted to lieutenant. I have the distinction, which, funny, I used to shy away from. Uh, Being the first female lieutenant ever to attain that rank in the history of my department. And I always felt like, "Ugh, I don't want to shine a light on that. I just, the gender shouldn't matter. It should be about competency." And I've since changed my position on that because I realize that visibility does matter, especially to young women who are entering law enforcement. And quite frankly, it never occurred to me that I would ever move up in rank in my police department because I didn't see examples of it. And so when it happened, again, I shied away from it, but now I fully embrace that idea that firsts do matter. But then I became a commander, and then after my chief left, I put in for the role of chief of police to I felt like I was ready. I felt like I had learned a lot, although you don't realize what you don't know until you get into the big chair.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then in 2016, I was grateful to be appointed chief by Mayor Tom Weisner, and yeah, it was a dream come true, quite frankly.
Very, very interesting, very impressive. Actually, I have a tremendous respect and soft spot for um, women in this profession. My wife of 25 years was a federal agent, and that's how we met. So very well aware of the unique struggles for women in this profession. And I have a daughter who is 21 who was a cybersecurity major in southern Utah. And she too has a passion for this vocation, despite the fact that we've tried to,
Dissuade her.
yeah, maybe give her some other options. We'll see.
Yeah.
But again, a great deal of respect for all that you've done in your past. What you do a lot of public speaking now. What is how did you get into that, and what is your niche, your area of expertise?
Yeah, so it is funny, public speaking was not something that I set out to do. In fact, quite frankly, I didn't even know that it was a profession in and of itself. As I mentioned, becoming the first female lieutenant and then the first female commander and then the first female chief, I was asked to speak at a lot of conferences and I would accept that invitation and I would go on behalf of my police department in uniform and I just thought it was such a gift to be able to share my failures and my successes with others, with conference attendees. And so speaking just sort of, I cut my teeth there and I didn't realize it at the time, but of course, that repetition of getting up and speaking in front of people. And then, of course, as a sitting chief, you're constantly at a podium and you're constantly in front of a microphone talking about good things and talking about bad things and talking to angry community members and and then happy people different so it just runs the gamut and as I look back I realize that's where the muscle memory was built but then and then during my chief tenure prior to the shooting I would go and speak at conferences as well and then the Pratt shooting happened the mass shooting and then I switched gears and I wasn't talking about leadership as much. I was talking about preparation and prevention. Preparation for those within law enforcement, because I kind of recognize that as much as we like to think that we're on the preventative side, we're mostly on the reactive side. We're going to show up, right?
Right.
But then I started talking, about prevention to organizations. And then I retired and I just assumed that I wouldn't be asked to speak anymore since I wasn't wearing a uniform. And then I sat down and wrote a book and purged my soul about all of the events that happened over my 30-year career, including the shooting. And that book then caused me to be invited to more conferences to speak. And that was at the beginning of 2022, and it's still ongoing. And I never, if you would have told me that I was going to, become a professional speaker, I probably would have laughed at you. But it was so organic in the way that it happened. And so what I'm doing now is going around, it's twofold. I go and talk to organizations about risk management, where I talk about Pratt and about the lessons learned, but I like to live on the prevention side. I feel like it's an act of service telling the story of those officers and those victims on that day so that other people can learn, one, hopefully, how to prevent it and how to prepare for it. So I talk on that track, and then I also talk on leadership. And I've actually morphed outside of policing. I speak with corporations, conferences of all different types, and I talk about leadership and culture and optimizing performance with optimism and disruption.
Wonderful. Awesome. Um, the title of your book, I apologize. I am embarrassed. I usually try to read the books of those that we're going to have on the show, but I have not yet, but I will be. What is the title so our listeners know as well?
The title is Reimagining Blue.
And can they find that on Amazon?
Yes, it's
Awesome.
on Amazon.
Reimagining Blue. Excellent. I will be certain to get my hands on a copy, read that, and actually comment on it in a future episode. But for those of you that are listening today, Reimagining Blue is the title of Kristen's book, and you can find that on Amazon. So grab yourself a copy and take a look. I'm sure it is a very, very interesting read, as her story is very interesting.
You're
Um,
hired as my publicist.
who's the publicist?
I said you're hired.
Oh, absolutely. I'll take that job. So, let's talk about Henry Pratt because given what we do and the message that we're trying to give out, it is a great example of just about everything that we try to teach here, which is that the police are coming at some point. They are just very, very likely not going to get there in time to save you if you're stuck in one of these unfortunate situations. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Pratt shooting was in February of 2019,
Correct. February 15th, 2019.
and you were the chief at that time. I'm assuming, were you, because I know how the duties of a chief, for those of you that don't, are not familiar with that, the agency head, especially in an agency as big as Aurora, and how many officers did you have there when you were there?
310.
Okay. So the duties of that agency head far exceed simply sitting in their office and listening to officer complaints on a daily basis. Those chiefs and the rank and file directly underneath their command are all over the place. They're giving speeches in the community. They're going to visit different people. They have all kinds of different duties. So while on duty, they very likely are not in the building at the time that something like this goes on because they've got many other duties. Where were you when you got notified that this thing was unfolding?
I was in my office,
Okay.
and it was Friday, February 15th, 2019, and 1:24 in the afternoon. And I happened to be in my office sitting with Commander Jack Fichtel. And as Friday afternoons go, right, it was, a little slow. Not much was happening that day. Everybody's gearing towards the weekend. And Jack Fichtel and I were talking in my office about very high level police executive stuff. He was sharing with me a recipe for his lemon caper sauce that he put on his fish the night before. And I always tell that story because it is just such a juxtaposition of, just the radio is humming in the background. We're just yucking it up in the office and, just having, just friendly conversation. And then my, I looked up and I see another commander who just tore into my office and said, "Are you listening to the radio?" And we had it on, but nobody was screaming. It was calm. And I said, It's on. What's going on?" And he said, "We have an active shooter." And it was if those words hung in the air. I'm not even kidding. It felt like forever. But I know that it was only a split second because I looked at Commander Fichtel and we locked eyes as if to just kind of verify, did you just hear what I just heard? And after that, we started tripping over each other. I grabbed my radio. I, just put my gear. I grabbed my vest, and we all ran. The three of us ran together and jumped into the squad car. And, I sat in the passenger seat, and Commander Keith Cross, who would later become the chief of police in Aurora, he was at the wheel. And I just remember hanging on to the oh shit strap in the squad car. And it was just completely a blur. We got there in under 3 minutes. But as we were en route, the call came out at 1:24. Officers arrived at 1:28. And it was at that time the officer started to make entry into the building and started to determine what was happening. The shooter was at large, and we had no idea where he was. Several officers made their way into the locked building. And I say that purposely because we had trouble getting into the building because the Pratt manufacturing plant was locked tight, steel doors, and officers could not get in. So the only way that those first officers got in was because those working in the manufacturing plant ran out at the same time, so they were able to go in. And that's when the officers found the victims in the office, and thus then started, the response. I'll stop there so as not to go through it, and you can, ask some questions, but because I could go on throughout this whole thing. But what we did ultimately was myself and the two commanders. It's a funny thing that happens because we are trained police officers. We are trained to go to the gunfire, and that's what we were doing. We were headed right towards Pratt. And something clicked in me in that moment where I thought, this is not my job today. My job is to be incident command, and my job is to set up resources, and running towards the thing is not staying in my lane. And so we quickly had a conversation about, we need to set up a command post and we need to figure out, what is going on. We need to get the information. And so we did just that. And we set up a command post, and then it is absolutely organized chaos. I mean, it was, everyone was converging on the scene, not just from my department, but from the entire state of Illinois as this goes over our statewide ISPERN,
Right.
and everyone converges, and it is utter chaos. And so you have to manage that chaos immediately. If you let it go, it's just going to be a disaster. And so that was the first order of business, was to get set up and then to find out who needs to know and who's going in right now. At this time, I'm hearing our officers go, they're going in. I'm hearing on the radio as I'm en route, I'm hearing one officer scream over the air, I've been shot. Another officer, I've been shot. And yet we still couldn't pinpoint where the shooter was from inside the building, because he was shooting from the inside out. And that was a surreal experience as well, hearing this over the air, and, just trying to get my mindset to a place of what needs to be done, who needs to know, and how do we manage the scene, and how do we get in there, and how do we stop this shooter now. And that is what became, how the unfolding.
Yeah. Yeah. And the general public does not, there's no way, unless you've done this job, you could possibly comprehend. Like you said, you've come up through the ranks of your agency. Similar story. I was a cadet, and I with a different agency, but from a very young age, you start getting immersed in law enforcement, and it's a draw to a special type of person. Takes a special type of personality to get into that job and to stay in it for a long period of time. The problem becomes, as you go up in the ranks, it is very difficult to turn off and go and stay in your lane. The first thing you want to do is grab what you need to do and be in there. That's what you've been trained to do. That's why you took the job to begin with. And now you have to recognize, like you said, that your experience in doing all those things is to give you the position of having the cool head at the command post and to assess and give the orders and whatnot. And it's a very difficult thing to turn off. Do you have any idea, from the time your officers got the call and responded? You said you had about a 3-minute response time from the time you were notified. Any idea how long the shooter had been active in the building before your agency or your department became aware of what was going on?
We're not exactly sure, because as you know, and sadly and tragically, the people who called the meeting were killed on that day. But here is what we know from ancillary witnesses, that the shooter, who is a 15-year veteran of the Pratt manufacturing plant, was being called into the office on that day, we believe at about 1:15 was the time that the meeting was slated to begin. And the call to us came in at 1:24. So that does track, because what we understood from a victim who was in an adjacent office, he said that the meeting was called, and basically the human resources director was the one speaking to the shooter, and he said, effective immediately, you were being terminated. The shooter stood up, removed the 40 caliber weapon from his fanny pack that he was wearing, and shot the individuals in that room. And then he left the room, and he chased another individual down the hallway, shot him in the back, and then after that went back into the office, and from what we understand, shot the victims again in the office. And then he went downstairs and shot his last victim, and that gentleman was Vicente, and he was on the loading dock just doing his job. So that's your time frame between what we think is 1:15 to the call of shots fired at 1:24. So let's call that, basically just 10 minutes
Right.
between when someone called 911.
So, in addition to the loss of life inside the facility itself, a number of your officers, as they responded, were also shot in this thing, and some of them sustained some pretty significant injuries as a result of that. Um, were any of none of the officers were actually killed, right? Everybody survived the event.
That is correct. I do, if you don't mind, if I just take 1 second, because I always want to say the victims' names. I will never. I said the shooter's name once, and I still abide by that. I said it. I said I was going to say it at one press conference, and I've never. His name has never crossed my lips since. But Russell Byer, Vicente Juarez, Josh Pickard, Clay Parks, and Trevor Wayner were the five victims that were killed that day, and I always want to say their names and the officers, the heroes that showed up. And this also speaks to the training. This is why I have the privilege of telling their story. I just happened to be the police chief on that day. I was the one who stood at the press conference, but they were the ones who showed up. And the minute the first officers arrived on scene, they tried to find that shooter. They knew that shots were fired, that people were shot, and they didn't stop and set up a perimeter. They went right towards it, trying to
Yeah.
find the shooter. The shooter shot one officer from across the parking lot, and then he shot another officer that was inside the building. And then, he basically, what we believe did, in fact, following him on the camera, is he shot these individuals in the office, and then in the hallway, then on the loading dock. Then he went to look for more people to shoot. And that's an important point to make, because those working in the manufacturing plant scattered. They did exactly what they were supposed to do: run, hide, fight. And they ran out of the building. They scurried out in all different doors. That also allowed our officers to go in. You see on camera the shooter walking out onto the manufacturing plant, looking clearly for more people to shoot. When he sees that everyone is gone, he then turns his attention to the first responders. He knows that those cops are about to show up, and that's where he takes the position and shoots the first officer who's running across the parking lot, and then shoots subsequently five officers. And so five officers in total were shot on that day. By the grace of a higher power, they all survived. One of the injuries was an eye. Officer Miller got shot in the eye, and he lost his eye as a result. And then Officer Marco Gomez was shot in through the thigh, through his testicle, and into his other thigh, which nicked his femoral artery. And the doctor told me that he had about 4 minutes until he was going to bleed out. And so throwing him in a squad car like the officers did was the right move. Officer John Cebulski, he disabilitied out from his injuries. He was shot in the kneecap. And Officer Jim Zeger was shot in the neck, through and through. I don't know how this happened. The bullet went through one side of his neck and came out the other without touching absolutely anything. He was actually the first one released, and put a Snoopy Band-Aid on him, and sent him home. And then Ray Rivera was shot twice in the thighs, and it was his shield, by the way, that took rounds as well, and that saved him. So, and then we had a minor injury that was inconsequential, but those were the five officers who were shot.
So, Kristen, let me ask you, and again, I 100% agree with your, um, refusal to name the shooter. I have the same position. In fact, I generically, and you will understand this, although some of our viewers may not. I generically refer to all of these guys as Adam Henry, right? So, that's my position with regard to them. What was this guy armed with?
He was armed with a .44 caliber handgun with a laser on it. And interestingly enough, when we first arrived on the scene and when our first officer got shot, that shot was made from a pretty good distance. I can't remember exactly how far, so I won't guess, but enough of a distance where we made the initial assumption that he had a long gun. And it wasn't until radio communication from witnesses started to come through saying, no, he has a 40 caliber handgun and it has a laser on it. And people knew what kind of weapon that this individual possessed, which is kind of another interesting twist to this story. He made it very well known that he carried a gun with him.
Yeah, so we can assume that the laser is what allowed him to have the accuracy he did at the distances he had, because typically a handgun, without some kind of technology attachment like that would make a shot like the ones he was taking very difficult.
Correct. And we were careful to, to take in that information, but it became more and more clear as 911 calls started coming in that the shooter was, this individual. And so many callers, witnesses who worked with this guy said, yes, he's got a 40 caliber weapon. He's got a 40. So it was at that time that we realized this is most likely the weapon that he has.
Interesting. And he had made some statements. He knew that his job was in trouble ahead of time, is my understanding. And he had made some statements to that to indicate that things might go this way if he actually did get terminated. Is that accurate?
Lieutenant Dan, this is the reason that I get up in the morning and that I go around speaking about this event, telling the story of those heroic officers and telling this story to any organization who will listen to me because this is a culture problem. To answer your question, yes. That morning, witnesses, according to witnesses, and we have notes, field notes from the police officers that took these witness statements. And in these witness statements, they said that at 9:30 that morning, the shooter actually declared to anyone who would listen, to anyone who was in earshot, he said, if I get called into the office today, I'm going to shoot every MFer in here. The witness then went on to say, they know that he has a 40 caliber weapon. He keeps it in his car and it's got a green laser on it. I mean, they had the specifics of the weapon. And I pause there for just a moment because this needs to be underlined, bold, and all of the things, and exclamation point. Not one person that day, that morning, reported that statement to management. Not one person thought maybe I should give the police a call. And then at 1:15, he gets called into the office and literally carries out the exact threat that he declared to everyone that morning. And that is, once again, this is a culture problem. And when I say that we are tripping over red flags, that is beyond a red flag there, that no one thought to do it. Now, I do want to unpack that for just a moment because in defense of people and the people who worked with him, remember, he'd worked there for 15 years. Here is the description of him. Yep, this guy was a hothead, angry all the time, always think the company is out to get him. There's your grievance, as we know that mass shooters often have a grievance, either real or perceived. And so, in everyone's mind, this guy was just a pissed off dude that had a gun, but he'd never done anything before. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, he hasn't done anything. So what's to say he's going to shoot someone today when he hasn't yet? So I understand the disconnect there, but like I said, that is the thing that I will talk about until I'm blue in the face is that we've got to start reporting this stuff no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. And why do you think, because we address this as well with when we do our active shooter response training through Hawkeye, we tell people, look, First of all, companies should set up some kind of reporting mechanism that can be handled 24 hours a day, and it can be done anonymously if need be. We're trying to save lives here. If you report something and you are inaccurate or you're wrong, you can always apologize. You can always say, I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that, but I just wanted to make sure that people stayed safe. If you don't report it and it goes south, as it did in this case, you have to live with the fact that you might have been able to prevent it by saying something and you didn't. What do you think is the root cause of people keeping their mouths shut?
I think it's just that. I think it's what you said is, what if I'm wrong? What if this person is just just a big hot airbag and just spouts off and really doesn't, intend to do anyone any harm? And what if I'm wrong? And my rebuttal is just very simple. What if you're right? And to your point, you can always backtrack and say, "Hey, there was here's the receipts. Here's the
Right?
data that I collected that brought me to this conclusion." But and I also people will say, "Well, what if someone would have come, to management?" Can we play this out for just a minute? Because this is what I want organizations to hear. This is what I want your listeners to take away from this is that there is always something that we can do. So let's play this out and extrapolate that at 9:30 that morning, as reported, the shooter said, "I'm going to shoot up everybody in here if I get called to the office." So what if one person would have said, "I think management needs to know about this"? The Pratt manufacturing plant has cameras everywhere. And if you are in a management position, that means, or in a, in a private entity, organization, what have you, you have the freedom and the ability to do more than law enforcement does. In other words, there is no right to privacy. There is no Fourth Amendment violation for someone working in your place of employ. And so management could have done a few things, and this is just off the top of my head. They could have maybe pulled up the camera and just, maybe watched what he did throughout the day. Here's what they would have noted. They would have noted that this guy parks in the same spot every single day, close to the door of the plant. And on this particular day, he parked at the furthest possible spot and near the exit. Now, that's enough just to make your eyebrow raise. Well, that's interesting. He did something a little different. Another thing that they would have realized is that he came in with a fanny pack on that day. He typically kept his gun in the car from what people had reported. Now he's wearing a fanny pack that he doesn't usually wear on that day. And of course, inside the fanny pack was a 40 millimeter handgun along with ammunition. And so if they would have just noted, if they also would have maybe looked at any browser history, they would have also noted that he did some research on mass shootings. And so there are several things that maybe would have been cause for concern to say, if we are going to terminate this individual today, perhaps we call in law enforcement to stand by, since we have various people who have told us that, he's known to carry weapons. So there would have been some things that would have keyed you off to, this has been interesting behavior and out of the ordinary behavior on this day. Now, that's easy for me to say as I armchair quarterback, but my point is take a pause and do whatever research you can, make a few phone calls, hey, any odd behavior, um and then determine, let's have somebody stand by. Or maybe, and this is for our HR individuals who are in charge of terminating people, maybe an in-person termination isn't always the thing. Maybe let him go through the day, go home, and then brick his, like no more access, have someone respond to the house, call him and say, you do not come in tomorrow. You are terminated, effective immediately, brick the computer, all of the things, I'll leave that to the HR experts, but we tend to think that we have to terminate someone in person, and let's break the rules and let's do
Right.
things a little different, especially when our spidey senses are tingling about
Yeah.
them more.
Yeah, and we actually encourage that. We handle a lot of high risk termination cases for people, and our first recommendation is always, why do you feel the need to bring him into your office to do this? there's no law that mandates you do it that way. If it's your company policy, let's change it. But you're bringing the fox into the henhouse, and he generally knows what's coming. It's a bad idea. And yet they feel, well, we want to offer this guy, we're going to give him 30 days free resume writing service.
A soft landing.
Right. It's like
Mm,
any way you slice it, this is not a
yeah,
pleasant thing. And your first obligation is to not to the person that you're terminating, but to the people that still work there.
that's right.
That's your obligation. So yeah, and are you starting to see, and I recognize that both you and I are not in this profession any longer, but based on the people that you're having contact with, based on the presentations that you're doing and the speeches that you're giving, are you starting to see a turn to where they're finally waking up to what is a better way of doing these things?
Absolutely. And not only that, I'm from what I have gleaned from our industry in law enforcement is that more law enforcement officers are being asked to stand by during a termination. Now, listen, we can't show up at every termination, and 99 out of 100 of terminations run smooth. The people pack up their box, take their fern with them, and walk out, and there's dignity and respect, and there's no threat of violence, and most of them go rather smooth. But we genuinely know the ones that we believe are high risk, that we should be calling for a law enforcement officer to stand by. And I speak on all law enforcement officers when I say we welcome that. That is what our job is. We can't do it all the time, and it can't be, like, especially in larger departments that are really busy. But if we get a call saying, hey, we've got a termination today, this guy has made threats, this guy has a weapon, known to possess one, we're going to be there and we're going to show up for you. And so I also think people often think that they're bothering law enforcement. And let me tell you, that is our job. We work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and that is our job, to mitigate threats like that. So don't feel bad about bothering a police officer when there is most definitely a substantial threat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think back in my days in patrol and investigations, and we all have that one giant roll of yellow crime scene tape that's in our trunk that's usually buried underneath the spare tire somewhere. It was my goal to get through my entire career without using up that roll of tape. You know, it's all about prevention and getting ahead of the game and doing that. When we go back to talking about Pratt, tell us how that event came to an end. Was there an engagement between law enforcement and the Adam Henry in this incident? Was there a shootout? How did it terminate?
Yeah. So the timeline is, as I said, 124 is when the call came in. And it was after the fifth officer was shot that our SWAT team then arrived on scene, and we had to breach the door to get in with our armored vehicle, with our Bearcat. We could not get into any of those steel reinforced doors. And the two officers who were inside, one had been shot, and the other officer stayed with him, applied the tourniquet, and applied life saving to that officer. And so we could not get in, and we discussed at that time doing explosive breaching. I don't know a whole lot about operations. I leave that to the experts, and the reason is because once the SWAT team demoed explosive breaching to me, I wanted to blow up everything, and they were like, "Oh, we don't have to blow up everything." But we discussed that in the command post, is maybe let's use explosive breaching. But time was of the essence, and we made the decision, let's just ram the door with the Bearcat and get in. And so that was just a split decision to get in there, to stop the bleeding, to stop the killing. We had no idea where he was. So that, again, the call went in at 124, and thus began a 90-minute game of trying to find this individual in a 300,000 square foot warehouse. And the warehouse is, as you can imagine, is stuff everywhere, places to hide. Here is an interesting piece of psychology for those listening. The shooter actually retreated to his workstation. So that we did a grid search. So what we started to do is we sent SWAT teams in integrated with our police department and other SWAT teams so we didn't lose comms. And they did a quick grid search, and then a rescue task force team came in to look for any other victims that may need to be triaged. At this point, we knew we had 5 victims, but we had no idea if there were more strewn about the manufacturing plant. So that's how the grid search went. SWAT team cleared. RTF followed and did a more thorough search, and that took until 2:59 p.m. when the SWAT operators were walking down. It wasn't a. It was just kind of a main thoroughfare in the warehouse, and they see this column, and it's a big cement column, and affixed to that column was a mirror, and they have the wherewithal to go, whoa, wait a minute. If there's a mirror on there, the shooter is most likely watching us respond or watching our approach. And so ultimately, what happened was they made their way towards that column, and the shooter was to the left. And he opened fire, watched them approach, opened fire on that SWAT cluster. There was another SWAT cluster that had climbed a scaffolding that was able to look down upon the shooter's workstation. And they were the ones that took the lethal shot to kill him after he opened fire on that initial SWAT.
And for any would-be Adam Henrys out there or shooters, I can tell you that opening fire on a cluster of SWAT officers is has a surefire one-way ending for you. That will do it. So God bless those officers and all that they did. Does Aurora have its own SWAT team, or did you get assistance from the state, or how did that work?
Yes, we have our own SWAT team, but that is their ancillary job. They have their primary duties and then during a SWAT call out. And so they all responded to the police department to get into the Bearcat to arrive at the scene. And funny, after this event, um, never opt out of taking an opportunity for a crisis, right? And what ultimately happened was, because of that precious time that it takes for SWAT to have to go to the barn, to jump in the Bearcat to get to the scene, we actually outfitted our SWAT team with take-home cars with all of their equipment. So that just cuts that response time in half. And I was able to sell that to my city council to say those are precious minutes lost when people can be bleeding out. That we need to get our SWAT team there.
Yeah. Yeah, and a department the size of Aurora, and correct me if I'm wrong, next to Chicago, it's the largest department in the state, correct?
Yeah, we're the second largest city in Illinois.
Yeah. So, funding tends to be a little more um, easier to come by because it is such a big department. The
Yeah.
department like that I came from was very small. We had at full staff, we had 30 people. We had our version of SWAT, which was our high risk entry team, of which I was a member for a number of years. And like you said, it was an ancillary service. Now, the issue was that you had during any given event, you may only have one guy on duty that's part of the high risk entry team. So now you've got these other guys that are going to be responding seemingly from home, or you're calling for other agencies in the area that have similar abilities to respond and help you. You're getting guys together that are not trained together. So it creates new issues. And I've always advocated for a nationally accepted training for active shooters for law enforcement, standardized protocols, standardized responses. In this day and age, there is no reason why an officer from Chicago, if put into a position where he has to make entry with an officer from Los Angeles, cannot be on the same page. There's no reason
Agree.
for it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely agree. That continuity is absolutely necessary. It's crucial. And to your point, um, the thing that I'm most proud of is the training that led up to this event. Our SWAT officers trained with similarly sized police departments. And when those SWAT teams showed up, they integrated seamlessly. And so that training has to take place before the defecation hits the oscillation. You
Yeah,
have to train in times of peace. You have to train in times of peace, and that's exactly what we one of the things we did right.
excellent, awesome. Um, Kristen, as we go into wrapping this up, I always like to give our guests the opportunity, especially when we're talking about these types of situations, to, based on your experience, give some tidbits to our listeners, not just the law enforcement folks, but the companies that are responsible for setting up these workplace violence mitigation plans and the individuals who ultimately are going to be tasked with saving your own life if you're put into one of these positions. Based on your experience, what can you tell us that's helpful?
One of the things that I speak about to organizations, and again, I'm going to say it again because it is worth repeating. You need to create a culture of reporting. The smallest threats, and as you said, even if it's an anonymous portal, I don't care how someone can report something. Just please give a mechanism, a platform where anyone can report something, even if it is just something that makes their spidey senses tingle. And then develop a threat assessment team where when you get those complaints, you take a look at the employee. Maybe you pull a couple people in, have some conversations, because a lot of times what I have found is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And what I mean by that is after the fact, someone will say, "Oh yeah, well we had a report on that individual, several months back, but no one shared that with anyone." And we've seen that in some of these university shootings where there was a police report or a social worker had some information that if the two would have talked, they could have probably headed that off at the pass. So the most important part is to take those reports seriously, develop a threat assessment team or a matrix to decide, is this individual a threat? Some of the other things that came to play on that particular day was making sure, especially if you are in a workplace that is an environment like a manufacturing plant where it's loud and people are wearing maybe protective gear over their ears, that maybe you have flashing lights. So when people, because ultimately here's what you want. This is the basic, the run, hide, fight. When something goes down, we want people to run out. That's what we want. And if they're so busy and focused and they can't hear because they're operating maybe some heavy machinery, or well, listen, we're in the day and age of these, where people are listening to the new
Right,
Taylor Swift album and, doing their work and, they're not hearing anything. So have some sort of alert system within your organization to let people know, get out. The other thing that was so helpful for us is when I told you we couldn't find the shooter, it was Officer Ray Rivera that locked in on where the shooter was shooting from on this giant facility. And he yelled out over the air, "It's door 14." And I can tell you that we were backwards when people were saying east side of the building, no west side. We were all out of sorts because when you're in the middle of it, you don't know which way
right.
is up. When he said door 14, that's when we clocked in on door 14. And that is when those officers converged on that shooter. And so having marked doors, both interior and exterior, really help your first responders when they show up. And then, of course, training for run, hide, fight. Another important thing that we stumbled upon is having a roster of employees. When we asked, when we first got there, how many employees are working in this plant right now, no one could tell us. So we didn't know who was working, no roster of employees. And so it was a guessing game on how many people ran out of the building. They didn't have the schedules of anyone, which was a little curious to me. So make sure you have that. Here's another interesting thing that unfolded. I'm a big technology person. And so I was really pushing in our city for all businesses and organizations to have digital maps so that when we respond, we can pull up the digital map of the floor plan of your organization, and we can, just look at that. That is a great idea in theory. Here's how it happened in practice. There is no way that somebody is going to take their phone, and try to expand it.
Right.
So we had a Pratt manufacturing employee, and what he did was spit out on a large printer maps that day. And those paper maps got slapped onto the back of your comrade, and they walked and saw, okay, turn left here. This is where. That is indispensable. So I love technology, but also let's go old school, have some maps of the
Right.
layout so that officers can see. Better yet, if you have cameras, share them with your local dispatch, because then dispatch could say, hey, we see you, you're walking towards it, that would be perfection, honestly. Meet with your law enforcement prior to anything happening. In times of peace, if you know, to your point, if it's a 30-person department, you're going to have the same person working that beat. So invite them in. Hey, take a walk with us so you can see the layout of our organization. This is what we do. This is the whole public-private partnership. Is we love to go out and meet our business owners, and we love to walk the premises and see, okay, here's the layout. So that way, maybe, it won't be the first time.
Right.
The other thing imperative is have a rally point off site. We had Pratt manufacturing families of employees who are watching this on national news, who just showed up at the scene because they
Ugh.
thought my loved one is working here, and there was no rally point off site. So it was actually a lieutenant, Lieutenant Jeff Winsek, that who was very much integral part of first responding on that scene. But then once the dust settled, he recognized that this was a problem, and he actually started a rallying site at a local university, so those individuals could show up there where we would then give them information. But there was nothing like that. So have a reunification site, have an off site. So when people do flee, you have somewhere to go where you can get information. So those are things, just kind of off the top of my head. And then make sure that we're coordinating messages. This was, the problem, as well as messages were being given to families, and they didn't match the messaging that we were giving. So you have to coordinate with law enforcement and make sure that we're all on the same page. That was one of the areas of improvement. I called in a outside entity to give us an after action that was completely objective. And they said that our messaging wasn't coordinated. And that was true of the city, the police department, and Pratt. So make sure that we're all coordinating the same facts, because that misinformation gets spread very quickly. So those are just some ideas that you can take, and just make sure that you're also giving your employees first aid. Those tourniquets and life-saving ventures really do come in handy. And it's not enough just to throw someone a tourniquet and make them watch a video of here's how you apply it,
Right.
because I had officers tell me that their hands were shaking so badly that they had to kind of go into the rescue breathing in order to steady themselves. So it's like you really do need to
Yeah.
play like you practice. And so you need to sort of maybe some scenario based training where you add some stress into the environment and then ask someone. But those tourniquets save lives. They saved lives that day on one of our officers. And so make sure that your employees, just in case this ever comes to fruition in your organization, that they're able to give life-saving any kind of life-saving acts to their comrades.
Yeah. All excellent points, excellent advice, and all obviously coming from 30 years of experience in actually doing this. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and for sharing your story and your knowledge with our listeners. And I truly believe it is our mission here to save lives and livelihoods. And the only way that we are going to do that is by training these people to do some of these things for themselves. The run, hide, fight concept, actually being able to, and I have an interview coming up with a young lady that was a guest in a book that I wrote several years ago, and we'll just call her Samantha. She likes to keep her name out of it, which is fine. She's an HR individual now, but she was attacked at a party when she was in a young age and stabbed multiple times with a broken beer bottle. Managed to get away from the attacker and tourniqueted herself and saved her own life because she thinks, to the best of her recollection, she saw a commercial about it on TV some point. She used a T-shirt and twisted off a bleeding artery in her arm and got a ride to the hospital.
That's some MacGyver stuff right there. That's
Absolutely.
crazy cool.
It
That
is
she had the
crazy.
clear head, and then to be able to reference that's some cool
Right.
stuff.
I said, I know police officers that are trained in this that flip out when the time comes. And I get it,
Exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
she did this with a T-shirt. So an amazing story. So people can do this. They do have the ability to save themselves. You've just got to give it a little thought ahead of time and prepare for the absolute worst. So I can't thank you enough. This is one of the best interviews that we've had on the show thus far. It was great. And for those of you that are listening, please like and share each episode. We do not advertise. We have a mission here, and that is to help you save yourself and save your company. We will continue to bring the best guests on board that we can find to share their stories and their experiences with you. But please like and share the episodes so that other people can see it as well. Thank you. I am Lieutenant Dan signing off. Going 1042 on this one, and we will see you on the next episode.